U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken calls for calm in meetings with Israeli and Palestinian leaders following a month of bloody violence. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. Months of violence exploded in recent days with an Israeli military raid in the West Bank and attacks by Palestinians in Jerusalem, leaving more than 40 people dead. The escalating violence follows the electoral comeback of Benjamin Netanyahu as the country's prime minister and the formation of the most right-wing government in Israeli history. CGTN's Stephanie Fried has more in this report.
U.S. Secretary of State Blinken's two-day visit to Jerusalem and Ramallah embodied a number of messages aimed at different parties, some subtle, others diplomatic, and still others direct. To the Palestinian leadership and people, he directly voiced U.S. administration support for Palestinian statehood, despite nearly a decade of stagnant peace talks, double the number of Palestinians killed by Israel's military and police in 2022 over the previous year, and the current Israeli government's plans for expanding settlements.
Palestinians and Israelis enjoying equal measures of freedom, security, opportunity, justice, and dignity. President Biden remains fully committed to that goal. We continue to believe that the best way to achieve it is through preserving and then realizing the vision of two states.
Subtlety was reserved for figures beyond Israeli and Palestinian borders, namely Iran and Russia, as Blinken alluded to possible U.S. backing for or knowledge of weekend strikes on an Iranian facility allegedly producing Shahed drones used against Ukraine.
Just as Iran has long supported terrorists that attack Israelis and others, the regime is now providing drones that Russia is using to kill innocent Ukrainian civilians.
Reports saying Israel was behind the strikes are floating. Diplomacy prevailed when it came to addressing Israel's leaders, as the Secretary of State clarified the White House position vis-a-vis Israel's democracy and the Netanyahu government's plans to derail it with a judicial overhaul.
Throughout the relationship between our countries, what we come back to time and again is that it is rooted both in shared interests and in shared values. That includes our support for core democratic principles and institutions.
Syntax aside, Secretary of State Blinken's messages delivered on behalf of U.S. President Joe Biden were clear. Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Tel Aviv.
There's much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Abdel Bari Atwan is the editor-in-chief of Ariel Hayom, an Arab news and opinion website. Ariel Kahana serves as the senior diplomatic correspondent for the Israeli newspaper Israel Hayom. Also with us is former U.S. Ambassador Gerald Feierstein. During his 41-year career, he held 9 overseas postings, including Deputy Consul General in Jerusalem. He's currently a distinguished senior fellow on U.S. diplomacy and director of Arabian Peninsula affairs at the Middle East Institute. And Saeed Erekat served as spokesman for the UN Assistance Mission for Iraq. He's currently the Washington correspondent for the Palestinian newspaper Al-Quds Daily. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Saeed Erekat, let me start with you. Let's talk about this wave of violence that's hit the region, mainly in the occupied West Bank town of Jenin, as well as in Israel itself. As we just said, there was an Israeli raid that killed 10 Palestinians. Then on Friday, there was another shooting. A Palestinian gunman this time killed 7 people outside a synagogue. And if we look at the overall figure, in January alone, 35 Palestinians have been killed. It's the bloodiest month since 2015, 8 years ago. What, in your view, is behind this escalation in violence?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be with everyone. What's behind the violence is the occupation itself. You know, this occupation is very violent. It has always been violent. It goes through ebb and flow. But in fact, it conducts itself exactly the same fashion, whether it's a Likud government or a non-Likud government, whether it's Benjamin Netanyahu or Yair Lapid or anyone, as a matter of fact. We've seen horrendous attacks by this, really in many ways, a gangster army, a gangster state against the Palestinians in Gaza in the West Bank. It's ceaseless. I mean, we've seen it happen in Jenin time and time again. We've seen Israel target Palestinian journalists and kill them at will, assassinate them. We've seen them doing this day in and day out. And for sure, I mean, we've also seen, the event, the attack on Friday. I guess it was Friday by a Palestinian against the settlers, basically coming out of the synagogue. So this will continue to go on as long as there is an occupation. The occupation itself is very violent.
Ariel Kahana, very tough language there from Saad Erekat, calling it violence that's perpetrated by a gangster state. Now, much has been made of the return of Benjamin Netanyahu and the formation of the country's most right-wing government ever. Given this increasing level of violence, what does the future look like?
Hello, and thanks for having me. So, first of all, I think it's not related to the new government in Israel, because you could see the numbers of casualties rising up in the last year when we had a different government, which actually included leftist parties as well. Now, the reason there is such violence is the incitement you have on the Palestinian side, which they educate their kids to kill Jews. That's the point. One of the events, Anand, that you mentioned, included a 13 years old boy using a pistol to kill Jews. It's really unbelievable event, and maybe some of you saw the videos. It's really unbelievable attack, and it's only one of many. Now, it's also very important to emphasize that most of the Palestinian casualties are not civilians. They are terrorists. It's people who took guns and intended to make attacks in the cities of Israel, to kill Israelis, with bombs, with guns, etc. So what is going on is that the IDF, the Israeli army, of course, has to defend Israelis. Unfortunately, we suffer from those attacks for many years. I'm talking with you from Jerusalem, when we suffer from such attacks, as we just had during last Saturday, and as was said in the entrance of a synagogue. During the International Holocaust Day, people were going out of the synagogue and they were murdered because they are Jews. And unfortunately, we can hear no condemnation by the Palestinian Authority. Right. We can hear no request from Abu Mazen, from the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, to stop those killings. Actually, we hear the otherwise, as we just heard from Mr. Erekat, that because of the occupation, it's justified to kill people. Okay. I think it's not the right way, and for sure, it's not the way to bring peace for the region and for the land of Israel.
All right, Saad Erekat, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that. I'd be grateful if you could keep it brief, please. We heard there from Ariel Kahana tell us that Palestinian children are taught to kill Jews, that the Israelis are not going after Palestinian civilians, they're going after what he termed are Palestinian terrorists.
Well, I mean, your guest is basically reciting the Israeli Hespara talking points, so there's nothing new in that. This is something that we have heard time and time again. I mean, I don't want to compare, but I think if we look at how many Palestinian children were killed compared to how many Israeli children were killed, I think the figures are staggering. I mean, I don't want, each child is precious, be he Palestinian, Arab, Christian, or Jew. So each life is very precious. But the fact is that this man who's speaking from Jerusalem is probably a settler, I don't know, but he will defend settlement encroachment and settlement aggression. There was 150 settler attacks on the Palestinians since Friday. He should check his figures. The Israeli army will probably give you the same figures. So to say that the violence is instigated and perpetuated day in and day out by the Israeli army, nothing. I mean, this happens day in and day out. All right. We need to really, the facts speak for themselves.
I want to move on to Ambassador Feierstein. Ambassador, great to have you with us. The United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he held separate meetings with both Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as well as the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. And the United States again reiterated its ironclad support for Israel. But looking at the situation right now, with many analysts and observers telling us that this is the most hardline government in Israel, that it's a right-wing, extreme right-wing government. What kind of leverage does the United States have with the current government?
Thank you, Anand, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. That's really the critical question, isn't it? It's not just a question of reiterating longstanding U.S. positions. I think that U.S. support for the two-state solution that goes back for decades is well known. Opposition, obviously concern about levels of violence, both inside of Israel and in the occupied territories, is well known. The question isn't about what the U.S. position is. It's what is the United States willing and able to do in order to effectuate policies in both Jerusalem and Ramallah that will end this cycle of violence and begin to move the parties back to some kind of a dialogue that will improve the lives of Palestinians, provide for security for both the Israelis and the Palestinians, and hopefully lead to some kind of a settlement. The reality is that the Biden administration really has not put down very clear markers about what it is prepared to do. And that's really what the bottom line is going to be. Simple reassertions of longstanding positions aren't going to help.
Ambassador, we heard Secretary Blinken there talking of the two-state solution. Of course, this has been on the table for decades. Do you believe that that is still possible?
Well, it's a shrinking possibility, absolutely. And you see ministers in the new Israeli government, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who openly state that they have no intention of allowing such a resolution to go forward. But as my friend Dan Kurtzer said, and Dan, as you know, was ambassador to Israel and an expert on the Israeli-Palestinian issues, said, no matter how you look at it, there is no other plausible solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict except for a two-state solution. There is no so-called one-state solution. There is nothing else that will achieve a reasonable outcome to this conflict except moving forward. And so it's incumbent on the administration to really take steps to preserve those possibilities. As I said, they're getting smaller by the day. But the administration needs to be forceful on this.
Okay, Abdel Bari Atwan, do you believe that a two-state solution is still possible?
Let me start to answer our partner from Jerusalem. I would like to say that this child, he did not kill Israelis, he killed occupiers, those people who humiliate them and kill his colleagues. Let me give you a statistic which actually will clarify this. Last year, 230 Palestinians were killed by the Israelis. All of them, unarmed, peaceful citizens, and including 40 children. The Israeli killed last year only 40 children, and I'm really referring to United Nations declaration. I'm not talking about our newspaper or anybody else. This is one thing. Second thing, which is very clear, the Israeli, whether they are a left-wing or a center government or radical government, they are killing the Palestinians. So what do you expect the Palestinians to do after that? They are actually doing their role as fighting occupiers, which is an illegitimate occupation of the West Bank. Let us go to the two-state solution. Where is the two-state solution? And why Mr. Blinken, for example, did not visit Palestine, visit the West Bank, visit Israel last year to say to the Israelis, enough is enough. You have to actually implement the two-state solution, the international legality resolution. Why did he come now? He's coming now to save Israel from the Israeli themselves, from Benjamin Netanyahu, from the right-wing government. So two-state solution, yes, it is viable. But I believe after 30 years of negotiation to reach this solution, actually the Palestinians are frustrated. no hope at all, and they turn to violence. I don't think there will be any application of this solution very soon.
Okay.
Last Intifada lasted 4 years. This one could actually last more.
Abdel Bari Atwan, I want to get back to you in a moment on the current violence that's taking place in the region, but I want to give Ariel Kahana a chance to respond to what you've just said. Ariel, we just heard from Abdel Bari Atwan there saying he made the distinction there that the people who were killed outside the synagogue were not Israelis. The distinction, he said, that they are occupiers, and he pointed to the fact that 230 Palestinians have been killed. They were unarmed, including 40 children.
So I have a simple question. I am a settler. Is that legitimate to kill me?
Yes, it is illegitimate, simply because you are actually settlers on occupied territories. You should not be there at all. So why you are there and you are armed?
So Anan, Mr. Anan, we just got an answer. We just now got an answer. Who is the side that killing civilians? I am living this side of the land of Israel since I was 4 years old. That's the land of Israel, and I am one person in the people of Israel. The land belongs to the people of Israel, yet my government and my governments were ready and still ready to compromise and give some of the land to the Palestinian Arabs who live in the same territory. But you're asking, what do we need for peace? What we need for peace is hope, is vision, is tolerance, and it should mostly be leadership by the Palestinians. You know, I, as a journalist, I covered personally the Abraham Accords. You know why do we have the Abraham Accords with Bahrain and with the UAE? Because those are Arab countries who wish for peace, who educated their citizens for peace and for tolerance and for accepting all religions and all people. Yet what we do hear from Palestinians, as we just heard, is legitimization to kill people. As I said in the beginning, they educate, their kids, 13 years old kid to kill. Please don't interfere, mister. That's what they educate their people. And I do hope, Mr. Anand, that one day there will be peace. And I do urge, and by the way, I have Palestinian friends who know that the leadership doesn't help them. And they want peace. Okay. But peace could happen.
Abdel Bari Atwan, I want to get on to...
We're ready to compromise for it.
All right. Abdel Bari Atwan, I want to get to Prime Minister Netanyahu. In the wake of this violence, he has issued a warning. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Whoever tries to hurt us, we will hurt him and anyone who helps him. We have already carried out extensive arrests of terrorist supporters, aides and instigators. We deploy forces, we increase forces, and we do it in different arenas. We will seal and destroy terrorist houses in an expedited procedure in order to exact an additional price from those who supported terrorism. This process already started and is in progress.
So, Abdel Bari Atwan, Prime Minister Netanyahu also said that Israel will expedite permits for guns for Israelis and step up efforts to collect illegal weapons. Where is that going to lead?
You know, Netanyahu said clearly he will send thousands of weapons, of guns to the Israeli settlers. Already they have a lot of guns there. And those settlers, they are attacking the Palestinians and killing them. And most of them actually were in the Israeli armies. I'm not saying to kill them or not to kill them. What I'm explaining, their presence on the occupied territories is illegal, completely illegal. What they are doing there, 800,000 of them on the West Bank. That's what I want to say. I don't want anybody to put words in my mouth.
Okay.
Other thing, Netanyahu, answering your question, Netanyahu said clearly that he will provoke the citizenship of the Israeli Arabs, those Arabs who are supposed to be equal citizens to the Jews and to the Israelis. The other thing, he is demolishing the houses of those people. The third thing, which is very, very, very clear, he actually imprisoned them and deport them. Deport them where? You know, this is their land. They are in this land for 8,000 years in this land.
All right. Said Erekat, The governor of Nablus is predicting a new uprising, an intifada, and we've seen that before from the Palestinians. He says the Palestinians don't have any hope, and that's why it could lead to another intifada. Do you see an uprising again?
Yes, I do. And it's simply because we have hope. I disagree that the Palestinians don't have hope. I think the Palestinians have proven to be resilient, to be strong, to fight for their land. They will fight for one democratic state. Your guest from Jerusalem was saying peace needs to be done with Bahrain and others. Well, that's all nonsense, disingenuous. Israel has only one war, and it is with the Palestinians. They need to get the hell out of their backs. They have been occupying them for a very, very long time, for decades, killing them and so on. I think that the whole world is beginning to recognize that Israel, aside from being a gangster state, as I described it before, but it's also an apartheid state. So this is coming, the chicken is coming home to roost. The whole world is recognizing that reality. And the two-state solution has ceased to exist. There will not be a two-state solution. There will be one state, either an apartheid state as it is today, or a state for all its citizens. And that's what we advocate. We advocate that your friend in Jerusalem and myself and my kids and my relatives and so on, we all have the same rights as we do in the United States of America, with one man, one vote. We all live equally under freedom with equal measures for all.
Right. Ambassador Feierstein, listening to what we've heard so far, you have spent 41 years as a diplomat in the United States Foreign Service. What do you think needs to be done right now to break this cycle of violence? I mean, you talked earlier on about vigorous diplomacy, but what does that mean?
Well, it's a very good question, Anand, and I think that this is the dilemma that not only Tony Blinken was facing, but also Jake Sullivan, who visited, Bill Burns, our CIA director, visited also, a very experienced Middle East diplomat. And the solution is really that the two leaders need to speak out more forcefully. They need to do more to bring down levels of violence on their side. That there needs to be some kind of a dialogue started. Abu Mazen, unfortunately, is a weak leader. He has real challenges of legitimacy. But nevertheless, there needs to be some kind of a dialogue that's launched between Israeli and Palestinian leaders with the U.S. We have the Quad, the U.S., the UN, the Europeans, who can help bring these two sides together and begin to work. I agree that for the Palestinians, it's really very difficult to see a way forward that doesn't include turn to violence, but. There should also be a clear understanding on the part of Palestinians that every time that there's been a turn to violence, they end up losing ground. There's no violence card that they can play that's going to help them achieve their objectives. And Benjamin Netanyahu needs to stop talking about threats and violence and sending weapons, and he needs to talk about the political process, negotiations. He has not done anything. I disagree with Mr. Kahana. The Israelis have not done anything to promote a peaceful resolution of this conflict for over 2 decades, and Benjamin Netanyahu needs to change that. And if he wants to see an Israel that can live in peace with Palestinians, he needs to put his cards on the table. He needs to contain the extremists in his own government and make sure that they don't provoke these kinds of violent outbreaks that we've seen over these last days and weeks.
Ariel Kahana, what's your response to that?
Okay, so very briefly, I'm sorry, but the ambassador is far from being accurate, because first of all, Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister, is the one who wrote the Abraham Accords, the peace accords with Bahrain and the UAE. As I said, Mr. Netanyahu agreed to President Trump's peace plan. He agreed to President Obama's peace plan. In all those cases, it was the Palestinians, it was Abu Mazen who refused and didn't cooperate. So from the Israeli side, there is no question. Even Netanyahu, which is a right-wing leader, was ready to compromise. Now, I will repeat that no one from outside can bring peace to this land. It can come only from the people who live here. And by the way, no one has any kind of intention to impose a peace agreements, including the current American administration. They say it's on the side's hands. And therefore, I keep saying to my Palestinians colleagues on this broadcast and in other places, it's in our hand. We have to educate our peoples to bring peace, not violence. And I can guarantee you, the day the Palestinians will stop trying to kill Israelis, that day we will have peace. Because what we do as Israeli Jews is defend ourselves. You know, the Jewish people has a very long, painful history. We have no other place to go. We will stay here forever. And if we have to use power to protect ourselves, that's what we're going to do. We don't like it, but we have no other choice. And once again, I'm saying to the Arab Palestinians who live in this territory, let's make peace. But for that, you have to abandon violence.
Abdel Bari Atwan, as Ariel Kahana just told us, no one from outside can bring peace to the region, can bring peace to the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Not the United States, not the Quad, not the United Nations. What do you make of that? It's only the two sides that have to talk to themselves.
The two sides. What a nice terminology. You know, we have under the Israeli occupation for 74 years. We signed Oslo Agreement, I mean the Palestinian, the PLO, signed Oslo Agreement, which gave the Israeli 80% of the historic Palestine. And despite of that, did they give us peace? Did they actually give us human rights, you know, the basic human rights? Are we actually equal to the Israeli who are coexisting with them or trying to exist with them, offering them one-state solution, as Mr. Ariqat said, in equal footing? You know, why the international community are interfering? Because the Israeli actually are not helping the international community to give peace or to have peace in the whole of the Middle Eastern region. The problem is, you know, you listen that to the Israeli speaker. He's saying that we are using power. We are going to use power against the Palestinians. We are here and we will stay. And okay, you are a settler. You are a settler.
Yeah.
What are you doing in the occupied territories? Why you don't go and live in Israel, for example?
All right.
You are saying that you would protect yourself.
Yeah, okay.
You are occupiers, and you are actually endangering the whole of the Middle East because of your policies.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it there. We have run out of time, but thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.
Whether it's about your education, the home you live in, or the items you buy,